Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for joining us. Well, we have a couple of the state's leading reporters on the big stories of the week, but first, the state budget deadline is fast approaching. What does it mean to you? We'll get to those subjects after these words.
Welcome to the fast-paced and unrehearsed weekly discussion featuring the leaders who help shape your world. Join us as we address the issues that impact you each and every day. This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Well, I'll tell you, the state budget deadline is really fast approaching. It's called June 30, or if you want to look at it, July 1. But the bigger point is that the legislature is very divided over it, and it's important to us in so many different ways. Joining me, and I couldn't have a better guest to talk about this, is State Representative Grove, and he's Seth Grove. He is Republican chair of the House Appropriations Committee, so he's been intimately involved in the appropriation process. Representative Grove, welcome.
Welcome. Thanks for having me, Terry. Appreciate it.
I'll tell you, it's something like $44 billion, which the House increased by what, about 13%? Do I got that right?
Yeah, they're up to 14% spend number. The House Democrats, $5.7 billion more in spending over the current fiscal year. Yeah, it was a big increase.
Well, what in the budget? Let's go to this first. What in the budget do you think the residents of the state will care about the most? I mean, there's so many aspects of it, but perhaps changes or increases or decreases.
Yeah, it really depends on your perspective because you hear from different stakeholder groups, right? So the education community, cares about the education components. The kind of social services areas really care about Department of Human Services. We have farmers and people involved in agriculture that highly focus on that ag budget. We have individuals that might be interested in more police service because of high crime rates, so they're interested in state police, the corrections budget. So it really depends on what you really care about as a citizen, because the budget is the single largest policy document we do every single year. It sets the entire structure of how we spend and how we run programs, because if you want a program, you got to pay for it, right? Yeah. So it sets that entire structure. It basically says what is important to the citizens of Pennsylvania in one large document. So it encompasses a lot of areas that people care about. And how do I know that? Because I get the letters requesting the funding every year.
Well, it's been not just nationally, but internationally covered. A certain bridge collapse down in Philadelphia. Right. Is the state playing? I know Governor Shapiro has been down and chatting with folks about how the state could be helpful. What, in your judgment, what can the state of Pennsylvania do to assist?
Yeah, so right now, Governor Shapiro did an emergency declaration, which we're going to have to come back and codify, because with the constitutional amendments to curb executive authority that were passed after the Wolf lockdowns, we only have 21 days of emergency declarations anymore. So we're going to have to codify that and move it forward. Governor Shapiro is under the gun on this. It's a big project. It's very important to Pennsylvania. It's very important to Philadelphia area. It's very important to the Southeast transportation systems, trucking, moving people and goods and services all about the country.
But do you think there's a consensus on it?
Yeah, I think it's critically important we move along. The federal government has provided funding, so we'll be in good shape. Sure. But politically, the governor's under the gun a little bit, because he's in competition with Governor DeSantis and Governor Youngkin. They had major bridge collapses, and they've done it under budget and within a few weeks. So he's a competitive guy. I'm sure he's looking at that and probably wants to do.
Omnipresent there.
Yep.
All right. Well, before we run to a break, I want to start something, and that is one of the big aspects of Shapiro's budget was education and the funding of our schools. So House Democrats, have a number which they put in, and then there was some changes. So let's start with the schools, basic education, and then we'll get to higher ed. Go ahead.
Yeah, so K through 12 budget is a large component of our state budget. Governor Shapiro provided about a $575 million increase over this year. Unfortunately, the House Democrats have this new progressive caucus that Governor Shapiro's 6%, 5.9% increase in overall funding wasn't enough. So they increased funding well over another $1 billion to reach a $5.7 billion, 14% increase, which no one has even considered a realistic. Even Josh Shapiro kind of thanked them for their input and just dismissed that as a budget. But they have real internal politics issues within their caucus. If that's the lowest amount of money to spend that can carry 102 Democrat votes, they got a lot of turmoil in their caucus moving forward, I think.
But obviously, your party controls the Senate, so
correct. And I don't believe and even Leader Pittman himself said earlier this week, it's an impossibility, the House Democrat budget. They were very soft on Josh Shapiro's budget at a much lower spend number. So I think you're going to see a lower spend number. I think you're going to see investment into education. The big question is, where do you put that money in K through 12? I think that the Commonwealth Court case on the constitutionality of our education system focused on kind of three areas, right? How we fund schools at the state level, property taxes, and school choice.
Okay. We're going to run to a break. When we come back, I want to talk about higher education, but I want to get to the rainy day fund and the future of it back after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Just a reminder, the Pennsylvania House has passed a budget. It's in the hands of the state Senate. Democrats control the House. Republicans control the Senate, so we'll see where that all goes. But one aspect that did change from Governor Shapiro's original budget was an increase, particularly for the 14 publicly owned universities. In our coverage area, we're talking obviously about Millersville, Shippensburg, Kutztown, and a variety of other institutions.
Yeah, so higher ed is, we have robust schools from PASHE to community colleges, the state-related, the independents.
Big, right.
So we educate a lot of kids, and they go elsewhere, and that's a big problem with their demographics, right? So when I look at our state finances, we're losing population in areas in the demographic of working age individuals. So that's tax revenue leaving, and we're gaining in the older demographics, which eventually end up on Medicaid.
Is that true for the community colleges and the public universities?
It's not
in the state.
Yeah, it is. Generally, they are leaving college-age students, but the governor's proposed budget does put some investment in there. I think we need to level between the state-relateds and the community college and PASHE. Obviously, PASHE is state-owned. I think the Chancellor and the General Assembly have worked well to try to shore up the finances of those entities, and we look forward to continue working. We own them. They are important aspects of local communities, local economies, and we don't have one in York, but we do have York College. We have Penn State York. I know the impact of higher ed on our communities, and it's been positive.
All right, what's the rainy day fund, and why should the folks care about it?
Right, so we're blessed that we have the largest amount of rainy day funds, and it's basically the savings account just in case something happens and you need to get through a recession. Plus, we have a surplus within the general fund as well. Combined, it's about $13 billion. When House Democrats increased their budget so drastically, they predicated on $800 million of new revenue. Half of that is actually interest payments from the surplus that the treasurer has been able to make good profit for the Commonwealth on, about $400 million, and it'll probably be more at the end of the fiscal year. But that's all one time.
But your point is that
it's all one time. It's all one time.
Despite the fact that this money is here, it needs to be retained. That's your point.
Right, because we don't know where the economy is heading. We're reading now and looking at the economic data. We could be very well in tune for a large recession coming up after the Christmas holiday season. And we know with recessions, there's a drop and a bounce back. So the goal of the rainy day fund is to kind of maintain a level of services and spending throughout that until your revenues kind of recover. But you don't want to spend it all. That's unfortunately what happened under Governor Ed Rendell. Spend it all, left Corbett with zero reserve funds, and then you're making tough budget decisions. So you want enough to last multiple years. And two, you don't want to use one-time funding for recurring costs.
Right, thank you.
And that's a big thing that Josh Shapiro and the House Democrats want to do with their budgets.
All right, I want to thank Representative Seth Grove. He's, as I said, Republican chair of the House Appropriations Committee. Thanks for coming on. All right, coming on with a couple of reporters, the big stories of the week. I think some of them may have to do with money. We'll see you soon.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by
Cross-State Credit Union Association. Credit unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, go to ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
All right, let's get to some very, very important topics that affect all of us. And joining me to do that is Charlie Thompson. He's with the Harrisburg Patriot News PennLive, and Tom Lehman. He's the Capitol reporter with WGAL News 8. All right, Tom, I'm going to start with you. The I-95 bridge collapse is a huge story. I mean, obviously it has a profound effect on transportation, lives. It's been covered internationally as well as nationally. You were down there covering it, correct?
Yeah, you know, I was covering Governor Shapiro's announcement about the timeline, in a way, of when they're going to move forward with putting this replacement bridge construction into effect. The bottom line is they've been demolishing what was both collapsed and damaged because of that tanker truck fire, the deadly tanker truck fire, unfortunately, I should say. But basically, Shapiro has said we're going to be working 24/7 around the clock to demolish what we have to demolish, and then they're essentially going to put a part of a road in place so that they can get traffic moving again while they build the permanent replacement around it.
Well, that only makes sense if you intend to use a road. You have to have some alternative pathway to get through, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it struck me as kind of an innovative, quick fix to get that span opened again, because it's probably perhaps the most important highway in the state, with apologies to I-81 and the Pennsylvania Turnpike, but but I mean, because of its location on the East Coast, it's a seriously important road for our economy and also for the local commuter traffic around Philadelphia.
Yeah, that's an important.
It sounds like it's going to be reopened in a matter of weeks as opposed to months because of the fix that they're proposing.
Well, I will say this, though. Shapiro, as well as PennDOT Secretary Mike Carroll, were extremely hesitant to give a firm timeline on when anything other than the demolition was going to finish up. And I think that that's worth also pointing out, because there's all sorts of stuff that happens with construction. And I think Shapiro said, listen, we're going to start trucking in the material to get this temporary road set up as quickly as we can. But at the same time, I think they were really, really hesitant.
But doesn't that make sense then, to make predictions about something that's, given this highly unusual situation to make a prediction about something that?
Well, I think that's exactly the thing. They don't want to put a promise out there and then something happens and doesn't live up to it.
But it feels like it's so fast-tracked that I think they're really hopeful that even perhaps by the end of, by the 4th of July, they'll have it reopened again. That's my guess, and I'm just speculating, but because they're talking about working around the clock and they're using this backfill, so they don't even have to really build a bridge, they just have to build a road over this backfill. And I just think he's looking forward to a triumphant reopening, in fairly short order.
Optimism abound.
Optimism abounds, yeah.
Though it will still be a partial reopening, and it'll probably still be kind of a traffic mess for a while.
Well, look, I want to get to the two different versions of the budget. I want to talk about minimum wage. I want to talk about school choice. There's some other issues where Democrats and Republicans disagree in order to try to get this done. I'll get to those after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine.
All right, let's talk a little bit about the different versions in the budget. Let's start, and Democrats and Republicans don't always agree. That comes as no surprise to anyone. When I had Representative Grove, I wanted him to talk in general about it, but you two can obviously get into some of the differences between D's and R's, liberals and conservatives, if you will. One of the big differences, it seems to me, Tom Lehman, is something called the minimum wage.
Well, I think Governor Shapiro supports the minimum wage hike. I think what's going to be interesting to see is as we continue to see the negotiations between Democrats, the governor's office, and Senate Republicans particularly, whether things like the minimum wage, which Democrats would like to see, I believe, gradually hiked up to $15 and then potential increases down the line, depending on a number of factors. But the bottom line is that a bargaining chip? Is that an issue that they say we'd like to see passed in the budget? What do we have to give you, or what do you want that we can give you in return? I think that always happens every year. And
it's $7.25 an hour. Is that right? $7.25 an hour.
In Pennsylvania,
in PA, back to what, 09, something like that.
Yeah.
And now they're talking about ultimately pushing it up to $15 an hour. Is that the latest version?
Yeah, I mean, it's $15 an hour is the target for the Democrats. I think that what we likely, it remains to be seen how far the Republicans would go. I'd be surprised if they would go to 15, but I think that there's room for the Republicans to probably meet them somewhere in the middle between 7.25 and 15, because the market economy has pushed wages for lower qualification jobs.
But one area
up.
of a possible deal is you raise the minimum wage, but you reduce the corporate net income tax. No. No.
Well, I don't know. I mean, there's interest in doing that, but remember, they did pass a scaled down, a step ladder down on the corporate net income last year.
Right.
And what we heard Senate Majority Leader Pittman say this week was he was kind of cautious about accelerating that down ramp because he said it's probably better to just focus on trying to meet the commitment that we've already made to take it to 4.99% by 2030.
And I think that kind of reflects in some way some of the concerns that have been raised this week, particularly over on the House side, where we've seen legislation that was unanimously approved, I should say, that eliminates a couple taxes on cell phones.
Right.
But the general concern about, hey, if we're really worried long-term about our spending, which is what Republicans have said. They're very concerned. They were already concerned with the governor's proposal. They're really concerned about the House Democrats' proposal. A lot of them have said we really need to be worried about draining down reserves or draining down revenue streams.
Yeah. I'll tell you, I didn't even realize, I'm holding this up, I didn't even realize we had a cell phone tax. And I read, I don't know if you folks reported that, but there were reports that a lot of people weren't even aware of it.
Yeah, but because who really looks at their cell phone bill closely? But 6% sales tax and a 5% gross receipt tax. But Terry, to your last question, I mean, I think there are other bargaining chips that are more likely to move in the budget negotiation, like for the Democrats to get the minimum wage, maybe the Republicans will insist on some form of something like a voucher program for kids in failing schools, so that they can, have alternatives to that failing school that their parents might not otherwise be able to afford. And things like voter ID is another thing that's a chip that's on there for a grand bargain.
Are we back to election aspects, election reform proposals?
I mean,
mail-in balloting?
Listen, I think depending on who you ask, anything's on the table. And I think the other big thing to remember too is the statute of limitations reform legislation that has been hanging around there for.
Explain that.
Well, this bill would open up a 2-year window if you were a victim of child sex abuse. You wanted to file a lawsuit that would otherwise be barred by the current statute of limitations. You'd have the opportunity to file that lawsuit. The problem is it passed earlier this year in the House, or at least the House has also made it clear they want to see the bill get passed clean. Senate Republicans, they tried to attach it to a couple other things, one of them being voter ID.
Well, the budget deadline is fast approaching, June 30. What's your estimate about whether they're likely to get it? I mean, it wouldn't be the first time the budget didn't get done on time.
I think I mean, just based on the public statements that several sides have made about not worrying too much about the June 30th deadline, I wouldn't be surprised if this pushes into that period somewhere around the 4th of July. But it'll get done before the overtime becomes a problem for social services.
But the fact of the matter is, a couple of weeks doesn't have any profound effect on the economy.
I mean, last year I believe they blew past that deadline with very little fanfare, if I recall correctly. So,
and, ultimately, I mean, I think it'll get done and close to on time, and because there's a lot of money sloshing around in the state's coffers this year. There's money enough to
do
meet the things that people want to have done. The bigger question, I think, is just these policy issues that get tied into it.
Thanks for coming on. All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And as always, you stay well.